I never thought owning a private bridge would become the biggest nightmare of my life. But here I was, standing in my driveway with a crowbar in my hand, and the most entitled woman I'd ever met screaming at me from across the water. My name is Isaac Ferguson, and I bought this property in rural Montana 3 years ago specifically because it was remote, private, and came with its own bridge crossing over Willow Creek. The bridge connected my land to the main road, spanning about 40 feet of fast-moving water that made the property feel like its own little kingdom. When I purchased it, the previous owner made it crystal clear that the bridge was private property, built and maintained at his own expense, and that was one of the selling points for me. I wanted privacy, and a private bridge was the ultimate gatekeeper. The property itself was beautiful, sitting on 12 acres of pine forest with the creek running along the southern boundary. My house was a renovated log cabin from the 1970s, and I had spent the past 3 years fixing it up while working remotely as a software developer. Life was peaceful, quiet, and exactly what I needed after burning out in Seattle's tech scene. Everything changed when the Riverside Estates HOA formed. I was not part of Riverside Estates. Let me make that abundantly clear. Riverside Estates was a new development that started going up about 2 miles down the road from me, closer to the small town of Millbrook. Some developer bought a huge tract of land and started putting up cookie-cutter McMansions for people who wanted to escape city life, but still have all the suburban amenities. The development was on the other side of Willow Creek from the main road, and apparently, the developer had promised residents easy access to town. The problem was that the main bridge into town was about 8 miles downstream, which meant residents had to drive way out of their way to get to Millbrook. My bridge, on the other hand, would cut that trip down to less than a mile if they could use it. But they could not use it because it was my bridge. I first learned about the HOA's interest in my bridge when I got a letter in the mail about 6 months ago. It was on official letterhead from the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association, signed by someone named Karen Vance, HOA president. The letter was polite but presumptuous, asking if I would consider allowing residents to use my bridge for a small monthly fee that would help with maintenance costs. I wrote back a simple reply. No, thank you. The bridge is private property and I prefer to keep it that way. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, Karen Vance showed up at my door. She was exactly what you would picture when you heard the words HOA president, a woman in her mid-50s with a blonde bob haircut that looked like she asked for the manager style, wearing khaki capris and a polo shirt with the Riverside Estates logo embroidered on it. She had that fake smile that did not reach her eyes. Isaac Ferguson? She asked, even though she clearly knew who I was. That's me, I said, not opening the screen door. I'm Karen Vance, president of the Riverside Estates HOA. I wanted to follow up on the letter we sent you about bridge access. I already responded, I said. The answer is no. Her smile tightened. I understand you value your privacy, but this would really help our community. We have families with children who need to get to school, people who work in Millbrook. The detour adds almost 30 minutes to their commute. That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem, I said. The bridge is on my property, and it's my responsibility to maintain it. I don't want the liability of having strangers driving across it all day. We would be willing to compensate you, she pressed, and we could draft a liability waiver. I'm not interested in compensation or waivers. My answer is no. The fake smile disappeared completely. You do realize that being a good neighbor means being willing to help the community? I'm not part of your community, I said. I was here first, and I specifically bought this property for the privacy. Please respect that. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the anger building behind her eyes. Finally, she said, "We'll see about that," and turned on her heel and marched back to her car. I should have known that would not be the end of it. Over the next few weeks, I started getting more letters from the HOA, each one more aggressive than the last. They claimed that since my bridge was the only reasonable access point to the main road, I had a duty to allow public use. They cited laws that did not apply to my situation, made vague threats about legal action, and even suggested that the county might use eminent domain to take the bridge. I consulted with a lawyer in Millbrook, a guy named Paul Henderson, who specialized in property law. He looked over all the correspondence and just laughed. They have absolutely no legal standing, he told me. Your bridge is on your property, built with private funds and maintained by you. They can't force you to let them use it. The eminent domain threat is nonsense too. The county has no interest in taking your bridge, and even if they did, they would have to compensate you fairly, which would cost way more than just building their own bridge access. So I can just ignore them? I asked. Pretty much. Though I would recommend you document everything they send you, just in case they try to escalate. I took his advice and filed away all the letters. For a while things quieted down. I thought maybe Karen had finally accepted defeat. Then the harassment started. It began with cars driving slowly past my property at all hours, headlights shining into my windows. Then someone started leaving trash at the end of my bridge, garbage bags full of household waste that I had to clean up. My mailbox was knocked over twice. Someone spray-painted "selfish" on the side of my storage shed. I reported it all to the sheriff's office, but Deputy Miller said without proof of who was doing it, there was not much they could do beyond increasing patrols in the area. I installed security cameras around my property, which at least stopped the vandalism when the perpetrators realized they were being recorded. The HOA meetings became increasingly hostile toward me, even though I was not a member and did not attend. I knew this because people from the development started showing up at my door to yell at me. Apparently, Karen was telling everyone at the meetings that I was the reason for their traffic problems, that I was being unreasonable and selfish, and that if everyone in the community pressured me, I would eventually cave. One guy, who introduced himself as Derek Montgomery, actually threatened me. He showed up drunk one Saturday night, pounding on my door and shouting that if I did not open the bridge, he would do it himself. I called the sheriff, and Deputy Miller arrested him for trespassing and making threats. Derek spent the night in jail and got a restraining order keeping him away from my property. That seemed to calm things down for a while, but I could feel the tension building. Karen was not the type to give up easily. The next escalation came in the form of a county inspector. A man named Gary from the county engineering department showed up one morning with a clipboard saying he had received complaints about the structural integrity of my bridge and needed to inspect it. I knew this was Karen's doing, but I let him inspect it anyway because I had nothing to hide. The previous owner had the bridge built in 2008 by a professional engineering firm, and I had maintained it carefully. Gary spent an hour checking every beam and support, then told me the bridge was in excellent condition and well above safety standards. "Who filed the complaint?" I asked. He checked his clipboard. "Anonymous tip. We get them sometimes. Sorry to waste your time." "No problem. At least now it's on record that the bridge is safe." After Gary left, I called Paul Henderson again. "They're trying to find any excuse to force the issue," I told him. "What's my legal position if they keep harassing me?" "Document everything," he said again. "And if it continues, we can file for a restraining order against the HOA leadership. But honestly, Isaac, they're just making noise. They can't actually force you to do anything." I wish I had been as confident as Paul sounded. The situation reached a boiling point in early spring. I was working from home when I heard vehicles crossing my bridge. Not just one vehicle, but several. I looked out the window and saw a line of cars driving across my property, using my bridge like it was a public road. I ran outside and stood in the middle of my driveway as a minivan approached. The driver, a woman I had never seen before, looked startled when I waved my arms for her to stop. She rolled down her window. "Can I help you?" "You're on private property," I said. "This is my bridge. You can't use it." She looked confused, but Karen said we could start using it. She said you had agreed to open it to the community. "Karen lied to you," I said flatly. "This is my private property and I never agreed to anything. You need to turn around and leave." Another car pulled up behind her, then another. Within minutes, I had 5 cars backed up on my bridge, and the drivers were all giving me dirty looks like I was the one causing the problem. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office. While I waited for someone to answer, another car crossed the bridge, this one driven by Karen Vance herself. She pulled up with that same fake smile on her face. "Good morning, Isaac," she said cheerfully. "Just helping our residents get to town." "You're trespassing," I said, "and you're telling people they have permission to use my property when they don't." "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a bridge. No one is hurting anything." Deputy Miller showed up about 15 minutes later. By that time, I'd stopped another 8 cars from crossing. The drivers were getting angry, honking their horns and shouting at me. Karen stood off to the side with her arms crossed, looking smug. Miller took statements from everyone, including me. I showed him the property deed and the survey that clearly showed the bridge was within my property boundaries. He told the drivers they needed to leave and use the main bridge downstream, which caused an uproar. "This is ridiculous," one man shouted. "We live right there. This adds 30 minutes to our drive." "That's not this gentleman's problem," Miller said calmly. "This is his property and you're trespassing. Please leave before I have to start writing tickets." The cars eventually dispersed, but Karen stayed behind. Miller spoke to her privately for a few minutes, and I could see her getting more animated, gesturing wildly and raising her voice. Finally, Miller came back over to me. "She claims there's an old easement that gives the public the right to use this bridge," he said. "Do you know anything about that?" "There's no easement," I said. "I had a title search done when I bought the property. The bridge is entirely private." "That's what I figured, but she's insisting she has documentation. I told her if she really has proof of an easement, she needs to take it to court, not take matters into her own hands." "Thanks, Deputy." "No problem. But Isaac, this is getting out of hand. You might want to consider putting up a gate or something to prevent people from just driving across." That was actually a good idea. That afternoon, I drove into Millbrook and bought materials to build a gate at the entrance to my bridge. It was not anything fancy, just a simple swing gate with a lock, but it would prevent cars from accessing the bridge without my permission. I spent the weekend installing it, sinking posts in concrete, and attaching a sturdy gate that spanned the width of the bridge entrance. I put up signs that read, "Private property, no trespassing," on either side. Monday morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was angry residents from Riverside Estates who had driven to my bridge only to find it locked. They screamed at me, threatened to sue me, called me every name in the book. I stopped answering after the 5th call. Then Karen showed up. She pulled up to the gate in her white SUV and laid on the horn. When I did not come out, she started yelling. "Isaac Ferguson, you open this gate right now. You can't do this. We have a right to use this bridge." I walked out onto my porch, staying on my property. "You have no such right," I called back. "Leave before I call the sheriff again." "I have documentation," she screamed, waving a folder in the air. "This bridge is subject to a public easement from 1952. You have to allow access." "Then take it to court," I said. "Until a judge tells me otherwise, this gate stays locked." She screamed incoherently for a few more minutes, then peeled out, leaving tire marks on my driveway. Paul Henderson called me that afternoon. "I just got served with papers," he said. "The HOA is suing you to force you to open the bridge. They're claiming there's a historical easement." "There's no easement," I said. "I had the title searched." "I know, I have all the documentation. But we're going to have to go through the court process. They've also filed for an emergency injunction to force you to open the bridge while the case is pending." The injunction hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, the harassment intensified. Someone slashed my tires. My internet cable was cut. People drove by my house shouting obscenities. I had to file multiple police reports, and Deputy Miller told me they were doing what they could, but they were a small department and could not provide round-the-clock protection. The hearing was held at the county courthouse in Millbrook. Karen showed up with a lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Richard Drummond. I was there with Paul Henderson, who looked rumpled and small-town next to Drummond. But I trusted him. The judge was a woman named Patricia O'Brien, who had a reputation for being no-nonsense. She listened to both sides present their arguments. Drummond went first, making a big speech about how the bridge had been used by the public for decades and how denying access was causing hardship to families in Riverside Estates. Then he presented his evidence, a dusty old document from 1952 that supposedly granted a public easement across the property where my bridge now stood. Paul Henderson stood up and calmly dismantled the argument. "Your Honor, the document Mr. Drummond presented is indeed from 1952, but it refers to a ferry crossing that operated at a different location about a mile downstream. The current bridge was not built until 2008, and it was built entirely with private funds on private property. There has never been a public easement on this specific location, and the title search conducted when my client purchased the property confirms this." Furthermore, the previous owner never allowed public use of the bridge, so there's no established pattern of public access that would create an implied easement. Judge O'Brien examined the documents carefully. Mr. Drummond, this easement document clearly refers to a different location. Do you have any evidence that it applies to the current bridge location? Drummond stammered a bit. The spirit of the easement, Your Honor, was to provide public access across the creek. My clients believe that spirit should extend to the current bridge. The spirit of the easement is not a legal argument, Judge O'Brien said dryly. Do you have any actual evidence that a legal easement exists at the current bridge location? We believe the historical use creates an implied easement, Drummond tried. Except there is no historical public use of this specific bridge, Paul interjected. The bridge was built in 2008 and has always been private property. The previous owner never allowed public access, and my client has never allowed public access. Judge O'Brien made her ruling quickly. The motion for an emergency injunction is denied. The HOA has failed to provide any credible evidence of a legal easement at the bridge location. Mr. Ferguson has every right to control access to his private property. This case can proceed to trial if the HOA wishes, but based on the evidence presented today, I don't see much merit in their claim. I could see Karen's face turning red in the gallery. As we left the courthouse, she followed us out, shouting, "This is not over. You can't keep us from using that bridge. We'll find a way." "Madam, you need to calm down," Paul said. "The judge has made her ruling." "I don't care what some judge says. That bridge should be public property, and we're going to make it public property." Deputy Miller, who had been at the hearing, stepped in. "Mrs. Vance, you need to accept the ruling and move on. If you continue to harass Mr. Ferguson, you're going to end up in legal trouble yourself." She glared at all of us, then stormed off to her car. I thought that would be the end of it. The judge had ruled, the law was clear, and surely even Karen Vance would have to accept reality now. I was wrong again. 3 days after the hearing, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I looked out my window and saw a construction crew working on the far side of my bridge on the Riverside Estate side of the creek. They were digging and surveying, and when I walked down to investigate, I saw Karen Vance standing there with blueprints. "What's going on?" I demanded. She gave me that same smug smile. "We're building our own bridge. Since you won't share yours, we'll just build one right next to it." I looked at where they were surveying. They were planning to build the new bridge about 20 feet downstream from mine, which meant it would still cross through a corner of my property on the approach. "You're still on my land," I said, pointing to the survey markers that clearly showed my property line. "We have an easement for the approach," Karen said confidently. "No, you don't. We'll see what the county says." I called Paul Henderson immediately. He came out to the property and confirmed that they were indeed encroaching on my land. He sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA and the construction company, and the work stopped pending another court review. But the damage was done to my peace of mind. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next attack, the next scheme, the next legal battle. I could not work effectively, I was not sleeping well, and I was starting to regret ever buying this property. The second court hearing was scheduled for a month later. In the meantime, the HOA started a social media campaign against me. They created a Facebook group called Justice for Riverside Estates, where they posted my address, my photo, and all sorts of lies about me. They claimed I was demanding exorbitant fees to use the bridge, that I had assaulted residents, that I was running some kind of scam. None of it was true, but the posts were shared hundreds of times, and I started getting hate mail and threatening phone calls from strangers. I reported it to the police and to Facebook, but taking down the posts was like playing whack-a-mole. As soon as one was removed, 3 more popped up. The second hearing did not go well for the HOA. Judge O'Brien was clearly annoyed that they were back in her courtroom with another frivolous claim. She ruled that they had no right to build on my property and ordered them to pay my legal fees for having to defend against their baseless claim. Karen was furious. As we left the courthouse, she got right in my face. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "You think you've won, but this is far from over." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, making sure Paul and Deputy Miller heard. "I'm promising you," she said. "One way or another, we're getting access to that bridge." That night, Someone tried to burn down my bridge. I was woken up at 2 a.m. by my security alarm. I looked at the camera feed and saw flames on the bridge deck. I called 911 and ran out with a fire extinguisher, but by the time I got there, the fire had spread pretty significantly. The volunteer fire department from Millbrook arrived within 20 minutes and managed to put out the fire before the whole structure was destroyed, but there was significant damage to the deck boards and one of the support beams was charred. The fire chief said it was definitely arson based on the burn patterns and the smell of accelerant. The sheriff's office launched an investigation. My security cameras had caught a figure approaching the bridge around 1:30 a.m., but they were wearing dark clothes and a mask, so identification was impossible. However, one camera had caught a vehicle parked on the road nearby, and while the license plate was not visible, the make and model matched Karen Vance's white SUV. The investigator, Detective Sarah Chen from the county sheriff's office, came to interview me the next day. I showed her all the footage and gave her the complete history of my conflict with the HOA. "This is a pretty clear pattern of escalating harassment," she said. "The problem is proving who actually set the fire. The person on camera could be anyone." "But the vehicle matches Karen Vance's SUV," I said. "Matches, but we can't definitively prove it's hers from the footage. We'll interview her and see what she says, but unless she confesses or we find physical evidence, it's going to be hard to make an arrest." Karen, of course, denied everything. She claimed she was home asleep at the time of the fire and that lots of people drove white SUVs. Without more evidence, the investigation stalled. I had to pay out of pocket to repair the bridge, which cost me over $15,000. The contractor did a good job, replacing all the damaged deck boards and reinforcing the support structure, but it wiped out my savings. I was angry, exhausted, and ready to fight back. I called Paul Henderson and asked what my options were. "You could sue the HOA for the harassment campaign," he said. "We have documentation of everything they have done. At minimum, you could probably get a restraining order against Karen Vance personally." "Let's do it," I said. We filed a lawsuit against the Riverside Estates HOA and Karen Vance personally, seeking damages for the harassment, vandalism, and arson, as well as a permanent restraining order. We included all the documentation: the threatening letters, the social media posts, the police reports, the security footage. Everything. The lawsuit got the attention of the local newspaper. A reporter named Jennifer Mills came out to interview me, and I told her the whole story. The article ran on the front page of the Millbrook Gazette with the headline, "Local Resident Sues HOA Over Bridge Dispute." It was fair and balanced, presenting both sides, but the facts spoke for themselves. The article went viral online. Suddenly, I was getting messages of support from people all over the country who had their own HOA horror stories. A few news outlets picked up the story, and I did a couple of interviews. The attention put pressure on the HOA and on Karen Vance specifically. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Karen as president. Apparently, the negative publicity and the pending lawsuit were too much for them to handle. They issued a statement saying that Karen had been acting without board approval and that they were distancing themselves from her actions. Karen, however, was not done. Now acting as a private citizen rather than HOA president, she ramped up her campaign. She started a GoFundMe to fight tyranny and raised over $20,000 from people who believed her version of events. She hired Richard Drummond again and countersued me for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The legal battle dragged on for months. Depositions, motions, more hearings. It consumed my life and cost me a fortune in legal fees, even though Paul was giving me a discount. Then, something unexpected happened. The county announced that they were planning to build a new public bridge across Willow Creek to serve the Riverside Estates development. Apparently, the developer had been required to provide adequate access as part of the development approval, and the county had finally gotten around to enforcing it. The new bridge would be built about half a mile upstream from my property, entirely on public land, and would be funded by the developer and the county. Construction would take about 6 months, but once it was done, the residents of Riverside Estates would have easy access to Millbrook without needing my bridge. You would think this would resolve everything, but Karen Vance was too far gone. Even with a public bridge being built, she continued her crusade against me. She claimed it was about principle now, not access. She wanted my bridge open to the public as a matter of justice. The lawsuits continued. My suit against the HOA was settled when the HOA agreed to pay for the damage to my bridge and issue a formal apology. The HOA also agreed to send a letter to all residents clarifying that my bridge was private property and that anyone trespassing would be prosecuted. But Karen's personal lawsuit against me moved forward. We went to trial 8 months after the fire. The trial lasted 3 days and was a circus. Karen represented herself after Drummond dropped her as a client, and she used the trial as a platform to rant about entitled property owners and the importance of community access. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before ruling in my favor on all counts. They also awarded me damages for the harassment and emotional distress Karen had caused. The amount was modest, about $30,000, but it was a complete vindication. Judge O'Brien, who presided over the trial, addressed Karen directly after the verdict. "Mrs. Vance, your behavior throughout this entire ordeal has been reprehensible. You have harassed, defamed, and possibly committed arson against Mr. Ferguson, all because he refused to let you use his private property. This court finds your actions to be malicious and without merit. I am issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting you from coming within 500 feet of Mr. Ferguson or his property. If you violate this order, you will be arrested." I thought it was finally over. The county bridge was nearly complete. I had won every legal battle, and Karen was restrained by court order. I could get back to my quiet life. Then came the final confrontation that led to me standing on my bridge with a crowbar. The county bridge opened on a Tuesday in late October. It was a nice modern bridge, 2 lanes wide with pedestrian walkways built to proper engineering standards. The residents of Riverside Estates finally had their easy access to Millbrook. For about a week, everything was peaceful. Then, the county closed the new bridge for emergency repairs. Apparently, there was a problem with one of the support pilings that had not been properly installed, and the whole structure needed to be temporarily closed while they fixed it. The county estimated repairs would take 2 to 3 weeks. The residents of Riverside Estates were furious, but it was not my problem. They could use the main bridge downstream like they had before. Except Karen Vance had a different idea. Despite the restraining order, despite losing every legal battle, despite the county bridge being a temporary closure away from solving everything, she decided to make one final push to force me to open my bridge. I found out about it when I checked my security cameras one morning and saw official-looking notices posted on my gate. I walked down to read them and felt my blood pressure spike. They were fake county notices declaring my bridge a public necessity during emergency road closures and demanding that I open it to traffic immediately or face fines and possible criminal charges. The notices looked official, with county letterhead and stamps, but I knew they were fake. I called the county engineering department and confirmed that they had issued no such notice. I called Detective Chen and reported the fake notices as forgery and fraud. But before the police could respond, cars started showing up at my gate, dozens of them, all from Riverside Estates, all demanding that I open the bridge per the county order. When I refused and told them the notices were fake, they did not believe me. They started honking, yelling, blocking my driveway. Then Karen Vance arrived with bolt cutters. She walked right up to my gate, restraining order be damned, and started cutting the lock. "You're violating a court order," I shouted from my porch. "I've called the police." "This is an emergency," she shouted back. "The county says we can use this bridge and we're going to use it." "The county says no such thing. Those are forged documents." She got the lock cut and swung the gate open. Cars immediately started driving through, crossing my bridge without permission. I was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. I called 911 again, but I knew it would take time for anyone to arrive. That was when I made a decision that some might call crazy, but in that moment felt absolutely justified. If they were going to force their way onto my bridge despite court orders, despite property rights, despite everything, then I would make sure they regretted it. I went to my garage and grabbed my toolbox. I walked out to the bridge, where about 15 cars had already crossed over to the Riverside Estates side. More were waiting to cross back over. I stood in the middle of the bridge and opened my toolbox. "What are you doing?" someone yelled from a car. "This is my bridge," I said calmly. And since you all seem determined to use it without my permission, I'm going to exercise my right to maintain it, starting right now. I pulled out my cordless drill and started removing the screws holding down the deck boards. The boards were attached with heavy-duty deck screws, and they came up pretty easily once I got the screws out. People started screaming, "You can't do that! We're stuck over here!" "You should have thought of that before you trespassed," I said, removing another board. Karen came running onto the bridge. "Stop it! Stop it right now!" "Get off my bridge before you fall through," I said, pulling up a third board. The gaps were now wide enough that driving across would be impossible. "You're insane," she screamed. "I'm a property owner maintaining his private property," I said. "You've been told repeatedly that this bridge is private. You've been ordered by a court to stay away from me and my property. You forged county documents to try to force access, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." By this time, I had removed about 20 feet worth of deck boards, creating a huge gap in the middle of the bridge. The support beams were still there, but the driving surface was gone. The people on the Riverside Estate side were well and truly stuck. To get back to the main road, they would have to drive 8 miles downstream to the main bridge. Deputy Miller arrived with 3 other officers. They assessed the situation and then, to my surprise, started arresting people, starting with Karen Vance. "Karen Vance, you're under arrest for violation of a restraining order, criminal trespass, and forgery," Miller said, handcuffing her. She fought and screamed the whole time. "This is injustice. This is tyranny. That bridge should be public property." "Madam, you need to stop talking," Miller said, putting her in the patrol car. Miller came over to me. "Isaac, I get why you did this, but you've created a situation where we've got 15 cars stranded on the other side of the creek. They trespassed on my property after their leader cut my lock and forged county documents," I said. "I'm just maintaining my bridge. It's my right." Miller sighed. "Technically, yeah, but we need to figure out how to get these people out of here." "They can drive downstream to the main bridge," I said. "That's what they should have done in the first place. That's an 8-mile detour through rough road." "Not my problem, Deputy. They made their choice when they decided to trespass." Miller made some calls. Eventually, the county agreed to provide emergency access by grading a temporary road along the creek bank on county land that would let the stranded cars get back to the main road. It took the rest of the day, but everyone got out safely. Meanwhile, I was served with an emergency injunction ordering me not to do any further damage to the bridge. I laughed when I read it, because the bridge was not damaged. The support structure was fine. I'd just removed some deck boards, which were stacked neatly on my property and could be reinstalled anytime I wanted. The county, however, was not amused. They sent an inspector out who confirmed that the bridge structure was sound, but that obviously it could not be used without deck boards. They asked when I planned to reinstall them. "When I'm confident that people won't trespass on my property anymore," I said. "That could be a while," the inspector said. "Then I guess the deck boards stay off for a while." The legal fallout was extensive. Karen Vance was arrested and charged with multiple crimes: violation of a restraining order, criminal trespass, forgery of government documents, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The forgery charge was particularly serious because she had created fake county documents, which was a felony. Several other Riverside Estates residents were also charged with trespassing, though most of them took plea deals that involved fines and community service. They claimed they thought the county notices were real and were just following orders, which the prosecutor accepted in most cases. Karen, however, refused to take a plea deal. She continued to insist she had done nothing wrong and that she was fighting for community rights. Her trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, the county finished repairs on the public bridge, and it reopened. The residents of Riverside Estates once again had easy access to Millbrook and no need for my bridge. I still left the deck boards off for another month, just to make a point. When I finally reinstalled them, I also installed a much more substantial gate with concrete barriers and security cameras that could read license plates. I put up large signs explaining that the bridge was private property, that trespassers would be prosecuted, and that the bridge was under video surveillance. Karen's trial was a spectacle. She represented herself again and used the trial as a platform to rant about property rights versus community needs. The prosecutor presented overwhelming evidence of her crimes, including security footage of her cutting my lock, copies of the forged county documents with her fingerprints on them, and testimony from me and multiple law enforcement officers. The jury convicted her on all counts. Judge O'Brien sentenced her to 18 months in prison for the felony forgery charge, plus additional time for the other charges to be served concurrently. She also ordered Karen to pay restitution for the damage she had caused to my property over the past year, which totaled over $40,000 when you included the fire damage, the legal fees, and the cost of installing better security. Karen was led out of the courtroom screaming about injustice and corruption. It was the last time I ever saw her in person. The Riverside Estates HOA underwent a complete leadership change. The new board president, a reasonable guy named Tom Shelby, reached out to me with a formal apology on behalf of the community. He acknowledged that Karen had acted inappropriately and that the HOA should never have supported her campaign against me. He assured me that the new board respected my property rights and would ensure that residents understood the bridge was private. I accepted the apology, but made it clear that the bridge would remain private and that I had no interest in any future negotiations about access. Life slowly returned to normal. The harassment stopped, the hate mail stopped, the threatening phone calls stopped. I was able to focus on my work again and actually enjoy the peace and quiet that I had moved to Montana for in the first place. I never regretted buying the property with the private bridge, even after everything that happened. In fact, the whole ordeal reinforced why I wanted privacy in the first place. Some people, like Karen Vance, will never respect boundaries or property rights. They think their convenience matters more than your rights, and they will do whatever it takes to get what they want. But the law was on my side, and in the end, justice prevailed. Karen went to prison. The HOA paid for the damage. The residents got their public bridge, and I got my privacy back. The bridge still stands, connecting my property to the main road, serving exactly the purpose it was built for: private access for one property owner. The deck boards are all reinstalled now, solid and secure, ready to carry my truck whenever I need to go to town. Sometimes, late at night, I walk out to the middle of the bridge and look down at Willow Creek flowing underneath. I think about how a simple property dispute escalated into arson, forgery, and a criminal trial. I think about how far people will go when they convince themselves they are entitled to something that is not theirs. And then I walk back to my house, lock my gate behind me, and appreciate the peace and quiet of my private property. The legal system worked, eventually. It took time, money, and stress, but justice was served. Karen learned that you cannot just bully people into giving up their rights, no matter how much you think you deserve access to something. The residents of Riverside Estates learned that convenience does not trump property law. And I learned that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it seems like the whole world is against you. A few months after the trial, I got a letter from the State Engineering Board. They wanted to feature my bridge in a publication about well-maintained private infrastructure. Apparently, the inspector who came out during the deckboard incident had been impressed by the quality of the construction and my meticulous maintenance records. I agreed to let them feature it, and the article came out a few weeks later with photos and technical specifications. The irony was not lost on me. The bridge that Karen had tried so hard to make public was now being celebrated as an example of excellent private property ownership. I framed a copy of the article and hung it in my office, right next to the court judgment in my favor. They serve as reminders that owning property comes with both rights and responsibilities, and that sometimes defending those rights requires you to take a stand, even if that stand involves removing deckboards with a crowbar while angry trespassers yell at you. Would I do it again if I had to? Absolutely. The moment Karen cut that lock and let people drive onto my property despite a court order, despite years of legal battles, despite having a perfectly good alternative available, she crossed a line. Removing the deckboards was dramatic, sure, but it was also the only way to immediately stop the trespass and make a point that could not be ignored. The property is worth more now than when I bought it, partly because of all the improvements I have made, and partly because the notoriety from the case actually increased interest in the area. Real estate agents in Millbrook joke that my bridge is a local landmark now. I've had people drive by just to take pictures of The bridge from that HOA story. I still work from home as a software developer. The internet is faster now after I upgraded to fiber optic. The cabin is fully renovated. The 12 acres are well maintained. And the bridge, my private bridge, stands strong over Willow Creek, serving exactly the purpose it was meant to serve. Every time I drive across it, I appreciate what it represents: the right to own property, to make decisions about that property, and to defend those rights against people who think their wants matter more than your rights. The bridge is not just a way to cross the creek. It is a symbol of property rights, personal liberty, and the importance of standing your ground. Karen Vance served 14 months of her 18-month sentence before being released on good behavior. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to Idaho after her release, far away from Millbrook and Riverside estates. I hope she learned something from the experience, though I doubt it. People like Karen rarely change. They just find new battles to fight, new people to harass, new crusades to justify their entitled behavior. The Riverside Estates development continued to grow. More houses went up, more families moved in, and the community thrived with their nice public bridge providing easy access to Millbrook. The HOA functions normally now, dealing with typical issues like lawn maintenance and architectural guidelines, not waging war against neighboring property owners. I occasionally see residents from Riverside Estates around Millbrook. Most of them avoid eye contact, probably embarrassed about the whole situation. A few have actually apologized for their part in the harassment, saying they got caught up in Karen's rhetoric and regret not thinking for themselves. I appreciate those apologies. Life in rural Montana is good. I wake up to the sound of birds and the creek flowing. I work in comfortable solitude. I take walks through my 12 acres of forest, and when I need to go to town, I drive across my bridge, my private bridge, the bridge that I defended with everything I hate. The legal bills were substantial, even with Paul Henderson's discounted rates. The final tally for all the lawsuits and legal fees came to about $60,000. But the restitution payments from Karen and the HOA settlement covered most of it, and the peace of mind was worth far more than money. I also wrote about the experience. I started a blog documenting the whole saga, from the first letter from the HOA to Karen's conviction. The blog went viral, and I ended up turning it into a book about property rights and dealing with aggressive HOAs. The book sold well, particularly among rural property owners and people who had their own HOA horror stories. The royalties more than covered my remaining legal expenses. Several lawyers and property rights organizations reached out to me after the book came out. They wanted to use my case as an example in their advocacy work. I agreed to let them share the story, hoping it might help other property owners who find themselves in similar situations. Your property rights matter. The law protects those rights, and you should never let bullies like Karen Vance intimidate you into giving up what is rightfully yours. The security cameras stayed up. I upgraded them twice over the years, getting better resolution and longer battery life. They have never caught another attempted trespass on my bridge. The substantial gate, the clear signage, and the reputation from the case seemed to be enough deterrent. I did eventually open the bridge to one other person, a girlfriend I started dating about a year after the trial. Her name was Lisa, and she was an artist who had moved to Montana for the same reasons I did: peace, quiet, and natural beauty. She understood immediately why the bridge mattered so much to me, why I had fought so hard to defend it. We dated for 2 years before I proposed, and she moved into the cabin with me. She set up an art studio in one of the outbuildings and started creating beautiful landscape paintings inspired by the Montana wilderness. We got married in a small ceremony by the creek, with the bridge decorated with flowers serving as the backdrop. Having someone to share the property with made it even more special. Lisa appreciated the privacy as much as I did. We would sit on the bridge in the evenings, watching the sun set over the water, talking about our days, planning our future. We talked about kids eventually, and what it would mean to raise them in such a remote location. We decided we would cross that bridge when we came to it, pun intended. For now, we were happy with just the two of us, the cabin, the creek, and the bridge. The bridge itself required maintenance over the years. I replaced some of the deck boards that had weathered, repainted the railings, and reinforced one of the support beams that had developed a small crack. I kept meticulous records of all maintenance, partly because it was good practice, and partly because I never wanted to give anyone ammunition to claim the bridge was unsafe or improperly maintained. A structural engineer inspected it every 2 years, and it always passed with flying colors. The original construction in 2008 had been done to extremely high standards, and my careful maintenance kept it in excellent condition. I thought about the irony sometimes. Karen and the HOA had spent so much energy trying to use my bridge, and in the end, all that effort had accomplished was making me more protective of it, more invested in its maintenance, and more committed to keeping it private. If they had just accepted my initial no and worked with the county from the beginning to build their own bridge, they would have saved themselves years of conflict, tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and in Karen's case, a criminal record and prison time. But entitled people rarely think that way. They see what they want, they decide they deserve it, and they cannot comprehend why anyone would deny them. They escalate, they harass, they break laws, all while convincing themselves they are the victims. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned about property law, about the legal system, about standing up for yourself, and about the importance of documentation. I learned that sometimes doing the dramatic thing like removing deck boards with a crowbar is exactly the right move. And I learned that you should never ever back down when you know you are in the right. The bridge stands strong today, more than 15 years after it was built and 7 years after the conflict with Karen Vance and the HOA. It is a testament to good engineering, proper maintenance, and the fundamental right to own and control private property. Every time I cross it, I remember the battle. I remember standing in court presenting evidence. I remember watching Karen get led away in handcuffs. I remember the day I removed those deck boards and the looks on people's faces when they realized they were stranded. And I smile, because I won. Justice prevailed. The law worked. And my bridge remains mine. That is the story of how the HOA ordered me to open my bridge to traffic and how I removed the deck boards instead, leaving them with no way out. It is a story about property rights, about standing up to bullies, and about the importance of defending what is yours. It is a story I will tell for the rest of my life, and one that I hope inspires others to stand their ground when faced with similar injustice. The bridge is more than just wood and steel spanning Willow Creek. It is a symbol of freedom, independence, and the fundamental American right to own property and make decisions about that property without interference from entitled neighbors or overreaching HOAs. It is my bridge, built on my land, maintained with my money, and used at my discretion. And no one, not Karen Vance, not the Riverside Estates HOA, not anyone, can take that away from me.